Hey guys, and welcome back. I'm Steven from Tech Overseas. In today's video, we are going to talk about AI coding assistant and especially GitHub Copilot. So you have probably heard of it. It's probably the most famous one. It's also the one that I use on all my projects on a daily basis. Now, these AI coding assistant, they will help you write code faster by suggesting lines of code or block of code. And because they are trained on a wide variety of open source code, they can help you for everything. From boilerplate code to complex algorithm to writing tests, finding bugs, finding syntax errors, they can do it all. Now, obviously, there are some pros and there are some cons. So for the pros, first one, increased productivity. These tools can really speed things up. They can generate code snippets, function, and they can even write tests for you. Now, two, learning help. They are awesome for learning. If you are a beginner, these AI coding assistants can teach you how to write code by providing examples, best practices, and so much more. 3. Versatility. They support multiple programming languages like PHP, JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, Ruby, and so many more. 4. Speed. You cannot believe how much time it has saved me over the past few months simply by just automating some repetitive tasks. Now, obviously, there are some downsides. Accuracy issue. Sometimes the suggestions aren't so accurate. They can generate incorrect code, which means that you will need to review and test the suggestion very carefully. Because like I said previously, these AI coding assistants are trained on open source code, which is kind of code that you and I are writing. Now, 2, over-reliance. Do not over-rely on these AI coding assistants because there is a risk of becoming too reliant. And it's very important that you understand the underlying concept behind the code that you write. 3, security risk. Now, these AI coding assistants are trained on public repository, so always make sure to double check and test the code thoroughly for security and compliance reasons. Alright, now let's walk through how to use GitHub Copilot. So first things first, you'll need to install the respective extension for your coding environment. They are available for popular IDEs like VS Code, JetBrains IDEs, NeoVim, Sublime Text, and probably many more. Now let's go ahead and let's go in the extension section and you will search for GitHub Copilot. Now there are 2 extensions to install. The first one is GitHub Copilot and the second one is GitHub Copilot Chat, which is kind of a AI chat interface to interact with your code. Now, once this is done, make sure that you sign in with your GitHub account and make sure that you have an active subscription as well. Now, once installed, you will see that you will have this little icon, which is the GitHub Copilot chat icon. If you don't have it, do not worry, just right click and make sure that the chat here is actually checked. Let's go through the GitHub Copilot commands. And there are actually 3 types of command. You have the / command, the @ command, and the # command. The @ commands are used to reference specific aspect of the code or the environment. The / command, they actually run the action, and the # commands are here to give more precision about the action. Now let's go ahead and use the first command. So you will type /help and it will actually show you all the different action and all the different variables that you can use in GitHub Copilot Chat and in GitHub Copilot in general. Now the first one, like you just saw, is /help. So /help, it provides a list of available commands and how to use them. And I think this should be your starting point if you're unfamiliar with GitHub Copilot command, and it will give you an overview of what to do. The second command, as you can see here, /explain. /explain actually just explain the selected code. It's very straightforward. You will use this to understand what a particular piece of code does. It's especially useful for like reviewing unfamiliar code and learning new concept, especially for beginners. It's very good. The second one is /test. So /test, it will generate unit tests for the selected code. And it's very good because it can quickly create unit tests to ensure your code works correctly. And it will even create the file automatically. The next one is /fix. So /fix will propose a fix for the selected code, and if you encounter any bugs, any errors, use this command to get suggestion on how to fix it. These next 2 commands, I rarely use them. So /new actually creates new code or component, and /new notebook, it just creates a new notebook, which is mainly for like data science project and stuff like this. Now you have @workspace, and this is for targeting the workspace. So the workspace is your actual folder that is open with all your text file and folders. The @VS Code is to ask any question about VS Code, and @terminal is to ask question on how to do something in a terminal, and it's actually your terminal that is running the code or where there is any error, and it can actually read what's happening in the terminal and help you fix any issue or any bugs. For the sake of this demonstration, I have actually created a very simple Next.js application. It will be a to-do application with front-end and back-end. So the main component is a to-do list, which is empty for now. I have created a Redis client, which is very simple Redis client where we instantiate the Redis clients and we connect immediately. I also have created some helpers to get the to-dos and set the to-dos. And all it does, it's actually reading from the Redis client. If there are no to-dos, we throw an error. Otherwise, we parse the to-dos. And if it's not an array, we throw an error. And to set the to-do, where we are actually setting the to-dos in the Redis client. Very simple. I have also created a REST API client to get our to-do, create our to-do, update the to-do, and delete the to-do. In this video, we are going to create the backend and create the front end. We shouldn't over-rely on GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot is only an assistant, so we should kind of guide GitHub Copilot. And if we see something bad, we should redirect where GitHub Copilot is actually going. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create our backend. So I'm going to create an API folder, to-do folder, a create folder, and then a route.ts. So the way I would work with GitHub Copilot is by adding some comments. So create a post route in order to create a new to-do. The body contains the to-do title only. Great. Now, as you can see, it's actually trying to import Express, but that's not what we want. We are in Next.js and we know how to do it. So let's do export default async function post. Cool. So it actually gave us the skeleton on how to create the API route. Now we know right off the bat that request is wrong because it's actually next request and we do not need the response. So great. Now in Next.js, this is not how you get the title of the body. You actually have to do request.json and you actually have to await the request.json. So like I said, do not be over reliant on GitHub Copilot. It's just an assistant. Just make sure that you actually double check everything. Now we are going to say if there is no title, this is great. So it's actually returning something, but this is not exactly what we want. What we want is we want to return a next response JSON object with a status code of 400. So now let's see, return next response.json error title requires status 400. So now a small trick, because we are going to use the helper that I told you in the beginning of the video, we are actually going to open this file so that GitHub Copilot is aware of the workspace. So now we have the get to do and the set to do. We are going to say get the list of to do from the Redis client, from the Redis store. And now you can see that it's actually auto-completing what I have here in this code, which is the get to do, which is great. So we have constant to do equals await get to do. We are going to import get to do. Now we can remove this. Now we are going to say create a new to do object. So this is great. It actually auto-completed the entire new to-do body. However, we can see that this is actually wrong. So we can do something like constant last to-do. It's giving us the last to-do in the array. And here we actually can change this code and say ID equals. So if we have a last to-do, we get the ID plus 1. Otherwise, we default to 1. This is great. Let's actually return the next response object we need to do, new to do. And what we can actually say, status 201. So now we have a very simple post request for creating a to-do. If something goes wrong, we have nothing to catch the error. So what we can say, we can actually select all the code and we can modify using Copilot. So if you don't know what I just did, I press Command and point and then modify using Copilot. And what I can say here, I can say /fix and I can say add a try catch around this code. It's going to generate the code and it's going to give me some suggestion and I will either accept or discard the suggestion. So now we can see that it actually created the try and we have the catch. So I can see what's happening. Next.js JSON an error occur 500. This is amazing. Now I can accept and I have the try catch. So it's actually catching any error. We can remove the console log. Now let's go ahead and test our newly created route. Now let's start the application and let's start to actually send our first request to create our first to do. So we can click send request. And right off the bat, you can see I get an error. I know what's happening, but I actually want to ask GitHub Copilot chat what is happening. So I'm going to stop the server. I'm going to go on GitHub Copilot chat and I'm going to say at terminal and I'm going to say explain. I'm going to select the code here and I'm going to say hash terminal selection. And it's going to generate something. And now I can see right off the bat, it's saying Redis server is not running. or there is a firewall or network issue. And I know that my Redis server is not running with my Docker container. So I will go ahead and start the Docker container. So we are going to Docker run, we open the new terminal, npm run dev. And so now we can actually send our request to create a new to-do. And as you can see, our to-do was created. So to-do 1, to-do 2, to-do 3, and so on. And you can see that the ID is actually incrementing. Also, I made a small change. So I had actually forgotten to actually set the to-do. So I just added this line of code where we set the to-do, we spread the to-do, and we add the new to-do. Otherwise, the ID wouldn't increment. So now let's create our delete. So delete route.ts. And so now what you will notice is that GitHub Copilot is actually learning from the workspace. So we have our utility function, we have our previous route open, we have our REST client API here open. So now it's going to be much simpler, much quicker, and better at actually suggesting code because it's actually learning from all those files that are open. So let's say create a delete route in order to delete the to-do. And you can see right off the bat that before it was trying to use Express and import Express, now it knows that it's in Next.js and we have next request, next response. And now it will actually trigger the code, which is pretty good. However, we can see some things. So this is not the way to actually get a query param in Next.js. So we have to say next URL dot search param dot get. And then we get the ID, and we can get the ID like this. If we do not have an ID, it says ID is required, status 400, this is good. Now, right off the bat, I can see that this method is actually bad because splice actually mutates the array. So we can do something different. We can say, for example, something like filter out the to-do with the ID. It's actually creating new to-do where it's filtering out the ID, and then it's going to set the new to-do. I can say something like this. Okay, we have this error because ID is actually a string because it comes from the search param. So there is something we can do. We can say constant search param, and then we can say constant ID equals plus search param. So now it's all good. Now this is great. It's actually filtering out the to-do. However, what we can do is we can actually trigger an error if the to-do is not found. So we can say something where check if the to-do with the ID exists. And so we can say something like to-do exists. Otherwise, if the to-do does not exist, it's going to say to-do not found with status 404. Now let's try the endpoint. Let's actually create my first to-do. So we have ID 5. Let's try to create another one, ID 6. And so now if I try to delete here with the ID 5, I send a request, success true. Now if I try again, it's going to say error, to-do not found. Now let's go ahead and create our find route. So we are going to say find, we are going to say write route.ts. And so now you will see that it will actually be much simpler because we have the context of the create route, the delete route, the HTTP, REST clients, and we also have the context from those utility functions. So now we can say create a get route in order to find a list of to-dos. So now you can say it's importing our get to do, it's importing next request, next response. And now we have our name function, which is a get request. We actually don't need this. It's getting the to-dos from the Redis store and it's actually returning the to-dos. And if there is an error, it's actually returning a 500. So let's test it, send request, and we get a list of to-dos. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 without the 5 that we deleted previously. Now let's create our last endpoint in order to update the to-do. So we are going to say update, and we are going to again create a route.ts, and same principle. It's actually going to learn from all those routes that we have created from the util method and from the REST client. So we are going to say create a patch route in order to update the to-do. So import get to do, set to do, import next request, next response is going to actually generate the code. So we have the patch. So now you see it remembered that to get the ID, it's no longer rec.query, but it's actually rec.nexturl.searchparam.getID. Now we have the search param, ID is required. We transform the ID into a number. We get the to-do. We check if the to-do exists. If it doesn't exist, we trigger an error. Now we have the title and we have completed. We say if there is no title and complete. So this is actually not an and. We can actually say or completed equals null. We can say like this, and we can say title or completed is required for 100. And now we have actually a new map. We map over the to-dos and we say if the ID match, we are going to return the to-do, and we are going to return the title, which is the title that is passed in the body, or the actual title that exists. And for the completed, we are going to either take the completed or the to-do.completed. And we return the to-do and we set the to-do and we return a success. So usually what you do when you actually update an entity is you actually return the to-do that was updated. And so in our case, we can do something where we can say constant updated to-do equals new to-do.find blah, blah, blah. And we return the updated to-do. So now what we can go ahead and do, we can go here and we can say something like this application JSON, and we are going to update our first to-do. So let's get all the to-do, and you can see that our first to-do has the title of my first to-do, and completed is actually false. So we can say my new to-do. Now I save and I send the request. Now when I send the request, you can see that now the title is new to-do and the completed is actually true. And if I fetch all the items, you can see that now it's no longer my first to-do, it's actually my new to-do, and the completed is actually true. Now what is happening is, for example, if we actually try to update a to-do that doesn't exist, like to-do 9, if we send a request, we have error to-do not found. Let's actually implement the API endpoint in our to-do list component. So something I really like is usually handle the logic before I handle the HTML, because thanks to the logic, the HTML will change. Prior to that, I have actually emptied the list of to-dos, so now we no longer have any to-dos in our array. So let's go ahead and handle the logic first. So let's say state of the to-dos. So now it's going to say constant to-dos instead to-dos, use states, and you can see that it's actually using the to-do item as an interface because we have the common.ts open here, we have the interface open, so it knows it has to use this interface. Now we are going to say fetch the to-dos from the server, API to-dos.find, so it knows the API request endpoint, create a new to-do, constant to-do, to-do create. If it's okay, it's going to refetch the to-do, so it's actually great because every time it's creating a to-do, if the to-do has been created successfully, it's actually going to refetch the to-do and revalidate the data. Now, update a to-do, so update ID, blah, blah. It's also refetching the data. Delete a to-do, delete ID, delete, okay. And is there something else we can have? Render the to-do, this is great. So now we are going to render the to-do. So it's going to give me the HTML code. Okay, so to-do on click fetch to-do, so we can refresh to fetch the to-do. It's mapping over to the to-do and handling the update, the delete. And we also have an input text to create a new to-do. So let's save and let's actually go on our application. Now we have this error because, oh yeah, it's because in Next.js you actually have to use these new use clients. Okay, so now we are going to create our new to-do. So new to-do, press enter, and it's creating a new to-do. Second to-do, press enter, it's creating a second to-do. And let's fetch the to-do. So you can actually see that those two to-do are actually in the Redis store. Now let's mark them as complete and complete. Now if we fetch again, you can see that here we have completed false, send request, both of them are now completed. Now if I delete one and I refetch, you can see that we only have one. So actually GitHub Copilot helped us to create this very simple component, and this would have taken you like probably, let's say 10 minutes to write, and we made it in 1 minute. So something to remember is actually GitHub Copilot will use the workspace and will actually use the files that are open to improve the suggestion. Bear in mind that this code is not perfect, it's not optimized as it is right now, because we have let GitHub Copilot actually build this application for us. That's why, as I said in the introduction, it's very important that you know the underlying concept behind the code that you write. Now, I hope you like this video. I hope you learned something today. I really encourage you to try these new AI coding assistant. They are really great and they save you a lot of time. Let me know in the comment what you would like me to cover for next video. And until then, happy coding.